Hello, hello. Good evening, friends. Welcome to the second installment of Leanda's English Experience. We're going to do some cozy listening practice this evening, and we are continuing our journey with The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Today, we're going to start with chapter 4. If you missed the first stream where we covered the first three chapters, then you can check it out. I'll post a link up here. Um, and otherwise, you can also find the link to the playlist in the description. For those of you who are joining me this evening, if you'd like to read along, you can find the link to the public domain Project Gutenberg page in the live chat and also in the video description. And as always, if you've got any questions about the book or something else jumps out at you and seems interesting, then please pop me a comment in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. All right, so without any further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 4, Mr. Badger. They waited patiently for what seemed a very long time, stamping in the snow, keeping their feet warm. At last they heard the sound of slow shuffling footsteps approaching the inside. It seems, as the mole remarked to the rat, like someone walking in carpet slippers that were too large for him and down at the heel, which was intelligent of Mole because that is exactly what it was. There was the noise of a bolt shot back, and the door opened a few inches, enough to show a long snout and a pair of sleepy, blinky eyes. "Now, the very next time this happens," said a gruff and suspicious voice, "I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is it this time, disturbing people on such a night? Speak up!" "Oh, Badger," cried the rat, "let us in, please. It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole, and we've lost our way in the snow." "What, Ratty, my dear little man!" exclaimed the badger in quite a different voice. "Come along in, both of you, at once. Why, you must be perished." All right, let's stop here for a second with the word perished. Perish in this case is an adjective. It comes from the verb perish, which basically means to die or to expire, to run out. We often use this word in everyday language to talk about vegetables or things like that that might have gone bad. And in this case, he says, "Why, you must be perished," which means he completely understands the situation that they find themselves in, and is sympathetic to the fact that they're probably freezing themselves half to death and probably quite starving from having lost their way. "Well, I never! Lost in the snow and in the wild wood too, and at this time of night! But come on in with you." The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside, and heard the door shut behind them with great joy and relief. The badger, who wore a long dressing gown, and whose slippers were indeed very down at the heel, carried a flat candlestick in his paw, and had probably been on his way to bed when the summons sounded. He looked kindly down on them and patted both their heads. "This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out," he said paternally. "I'm afraid you've been up to some of your pranks again, Ratty. But come along, come into the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire there, and supper and everything." He shuffled on in front of them, carrying the light, and they followed him, nudging each other in an anticipating sort of way, down a long, gloomy, and, to tell you the truth, decidedly shabby passage, into a sort of central hall, out of which they could dimly see other long tunnel passages branching, passages mysterious and without apparent end. But there were doors in the hall as well, stout oaken, comfortable-looking doors. One of these the badger flung open, and at once they found themselves in all the glow and warmth of a large firelit kitchen. The floor was well-worn red brick, and on the wide hearth burnt a fire of logs, between two attractive chimney corners tucked away in the wall, well out of any suspicion of draught. A couple of high-backed settles facing each other on either side of the fire gave further sitting accommodation for the socially disposed. In the middle of the room stood a long table of plain boards placed on trestles, with benches down each side. At one end of it, where an armchair stood pushed back, were spread the remains of Badger's plain but ample supper. Rows of spotless plates winked from the shelves of the dresser at the far end of the room, and from the rafters overhead hung hams, bundles of dried herbs, nets of onions, baskets of eggs. It seemed a place where heroes could fitly feast after victory, where weary harvesters could line up in scores along the table and keep their harvest home with mirth and song, or where two or three friends of simple tastes could sit about as they pleased and eat and smoke and talk in comfort and contentment. The ruddy brick floor The ruddy brick floor smiled up at the smoky ceiling. The oaken settles, shiny with long wear, exchanged cheerful glances with each other. Plates on the dressers grinned at the pots on the shelf, and the merry firelight flickered and played over everything without distinction. I really love this description of Badger's place. I find it quite interesting because Badger is painted as being quite a gruff, um, an unwelcoming sort. In the first chapter, or maybe it was the second one at the riverbank, he happens upon Rat and Mole as they're having their picnic and chooses not to join them without even saying a word. He just disappears and turns his back on them. And Rat makes it very clear that Badger doesn't really like social activity. He seems to be a bit of a hermit or a recluse. But in this case, everything in the room is being described sort of in human terms and quite friendly and, how should I say, sparkly and joyful. Um, Plates on the dresser grinned at pots on the shelf, and the merry firelight flickered and played out over everything without distinction. It just makes it seem such a warm and happy and welcoming place, which is quite a cool contrast compared to what you would imagine from Badger. The kindly Badger thrust them down on a settle to toast themselves at the fire and bade them remove their wet coats and boots. Then he fetched them dressing gowns and slippers, and himself bathed the mole's shin with warm water and mended the cut with sticking plaster till the whole thing was just as good as new, if not better. In the embracing light and warmth, warm and dry at last, with weary legs propped up in front of them, and suggestive clinks of plates being arranged on the table behind, it seemed to the storm-driven animals now in safe anchorage that the cold and trackless wildwood just left outside was miles and miles away, and all that they had suffered in its in it a half-forgotten dream. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, the Badger summoned them to the table where he had been busy laying a repast. A repast is a meal. They had felt pretty hungry before, but when they actually saw at last the supper that was spread for them, really it seemed only a question of what they should attack first, where all was so attractive, and whether the other things would obligingly wait for them till they had a time to give them attention. Conversation was impossible for a long time, and when it was slowly resumed, it was that regrettable sort of conversation that results from talking with your mouth full. The Badger did not mind that sort of thing at all, nor did he take any notice of elbows on the table or everybody speaking at once. As he did not go into society himself, he had got an idea that these things belonged to the things that didn't really matter. We know, of course, that he was wrong and took too narrow a view, because they do matter very much, though it would take too long to explain why. Isn't that interesting? Because I kind of feel like modern society really doesn't care about those kinds of table manners in everyday life anymore. Things like sitting with your elbow on the table or talking at the same time, even people talking with their mouths full, is such a common thing for us to observe in our daily lives. But considering the time that this book was written and published, society put a very high stock on manners and one's station, and not following the right table manners was a way to very quickly identify yourself as somebody who didn't belong to the right social station for, how should I say, suitable company, I guess, which is really very interesting. And I guess that's also why they say it does matter very much, but it would take too long to explain why. He sat in his armchair at the head of the table and nodded gravely at intervals as the animals told their story, and he did not seem surprised or shocked at anything, and he never said, "I told you so," or "just what I always said," or remarked that they ought to have done so and so, or ought not to have done something else. The mole began to feel very friendly towards him. When supper was really finished at last, and each animal felt that his skin was now as tight as was decently safe, and that by this time he didn't care a hang for anybody or anything, they gathered around the glowing embers of the great wood fire and thought how jolly it was to be sitting up so late and so independent and so full. And after they had chatted for a time about things in general, the badger said heartily, "Now then, tell us the news from your part of the world. How is old Toad going on?" "Oh, from bad to worse," said Rat gravely, while the mole, cocked up on a settle and basking in the firelight, his heels higher than his head, tried to look properly mournful. "Another mash-up, only last week, and a bad one. You see, he will insist on driving himself, and he's hopelessly incapable. If he'd only employ a decent, steady, well-trained animal, pay him good wages, and leave everything to him, he'd get on all right. But no, he's convinced he's heaven-born driver, and nobody can teach him anything, and all the rest that follows." "How many has he had?" inquired the badger gloomily. "Smashes or machines? Oh, well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad. This is the seventh. As for the others, that coach house of his, well, it's all piled up, literally piled up to the roof, with fragments of motor cars, none of them bigger than your hat. That accounts for the other six, so far as they can be accounted for." "He's been in hospital 3 times," put in the mole. "And as for the fines he's had to pay, it's simply awful to think of." "He's been in hospital 3 times?" put in the mole. Ah, sorry, guys. I lost my place for a second there. Yes, and that's part of the trouble," continued the rat. "Toad's rich, we all know, but he's not a millionaire, and he's a hopelessly bad driver, and quite regardless of law and order. Killed or ruined, it's got to be one of those two things sooner or later. Badger, we're his friends. Oughtn't we do something?" The badger went through a bit of hard thinking. "Now look here," he said at last, rather severely. "Of course you know I can't do anything now." His two friends assented, quite understanding his point. No animal, according to the rules of animal etiquette, is ever expected to do anything strenuous or heroic or even moderately active during the off-season of winter. All are sleepy, some actually asleep. All are weather-bound, more or less, and all are resting from the arduous days and nights, during which every muscle in them had been severely tested and every energy kept at full stretch. "Very well, then," continued the badger, "but when once the year has really turned, and the nights are shorter, and halfway through them our rouses and feels fidgety and wanting to be up and doing by sunrise, if not before, you know." Both animals nodded gravely. They knew. "Very well, then," continued the badger. "We, that is you and me, and our friend the mole here, we'll take Toady seriously in hand. We'll stand no nonsense whatsoever. We'll bring him back to reason, by force if need be. We'll make him be a sensible Toad. We're, well, well, you're asleep, Rat." "Not me," waking up with a jerk. "He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since supper," said Mole, laughing. He himself was feeling quite wakeful and even lively, though he didn't know why. The reason was, of course, that he, being naturally an underground animal by birth and breeding, the situation of Badger's house exactly suited him and made him feel at home, while the rat, who slept every night in a bedroom, the windows of which opened onto a breezy river, naturally felt the atmosphere still and oppressive. Well, it's time we were all in bed, said Badger, getting up and fetching flat candlesticks. Come along, you two, and I'll show you to your quarters. And take your time tomorrow morning. Breakfast at any hour you please. He conducted the two animals to a long room that seemed half bedchamber and half loft. The badger's winter stores, which indeed were visible everywhere, took up half the room. Piles of apples, turnips, and potatoes, baskets full of nuts, and jars of honey. But the two little white beds on the remainder of the floor looked soft and inviting, and the linen on them, though coarse, was clean and smelt beautifully of lavender, and the mole and the water rat, shaking off their garments in some 30 seconds, tumbled in between the sheets in great joy and contentment. In accordance with the kindly badger's injunctions, the two tired animals came down to breakfast very late next morning, and found a bright fire burning in the kitchen, and two young hedgehogs sitting on a bench at the table, eating oatmeal porridge out of wooden bowls. The hedgehogs dropped their spoons, rose to their feet, and ducked their heads respectfully as the two entered. "There, sit down," said Rat pleasantly, "and go on with your porridge. Where have you youngsters come from? Lost your way in the snow, I suppose?" "Yes, please, sir," said the elder of the two hedgehogs respectfully. "Me and Billy here, we was trying to find our way to school. Mother would have us go, was ever was the weather ever so, and of course we lost ourselves, sir. And Billy, he got frightened and took and cried, being young and faint-hearted. And at last we happened up against Mr. Badger's back door, and made so bold as to knock, sir, for Mr. Badger, he's a kind-hearted gentleman, as everyone knows." "I understand," said Rat, cutting himself some rashers from a side of bacon, while the mole dropped some eggs into the saucepan. "And what's the weather like outside? You needn't sir me quite so much," he added. "Oh, terribly bad, sir, terribly deep in the snow, the snow is," said the hedgehog, "not getting out for the likes of a gentleman to-day." "Where's Mr. Badger?" inquired the mole, as he warmed the coffee pot before the fire. "The master's gone into his study, sir," replied the hedgehog, "and he said as how he wasn't going to be particularly busy this morning, and on no account was he to be disturbed." This explanation, of course, was thoroughly understood by everyone present. The fact is, as already set forth, when you live a life of intense activity for 6 months in the year, and of comparative or actual somnolence for the other 6, during the latter period you cannot be continually pleading sleepiness when there are people about or things to be done. The excuse gets monotonous. The animals well knew that Badger, having eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study and settled himself in an armchair with his legs up on another and a red cotton handkerchief over his face, and was being busy in the usual way at this time of year. The front door bell clanged loudly, and the rat, who was very greasy with buttered toast, sent Billy, the smaller hedgehog, to see who it might be. There was a sound of much stamping in the hall, and presently Billy returned in the front of the otter, who threw himself on the rat with an embrace and shout of affectionate greeting. "Get off!" spluttered the rat with a mouthful. "Thought I should find you here all right," said Otter cheerfully. "You were all in a great state of alarm along the river bank when I arrived this morning. Rat never been home all night, nor Mole neither. Something dreadful must have happened, they said, and the snow had covered up all your tracks, of course. But I knew that when people were in a fix, they mostly went to Badger, or else Badger got to know of it somehow, so I came straight off here, through the wildwood and the snow. My! It was fine, coming through the snow as the red sun was rising and showing against the black tree trunks. As you went along in the stillness, every now and then masses of snow slid off the branches suddenly with a flop, making you jump and run for cover. Snow castles and snow caverns had sprung up out of nowhere in the night, and snow bridges, terraces, and ramparts. I could have stayed and played with them for hours. Here and there great branches had been torn away by the sheer weight of the snow. and robins perched and hopped on them in their perky, conceited way, just as they had been done it, just as they had if they had done it themselves. A ragged string of wild geese passed overhead, high on the grey sky, and a few rooks whirled over the trees, inspected, and flapped off homewards with disgusted expressions. But I met no sensible being to ask the news of. About halfway across, I came on a rabbit sitting on a stump, cleaning his silly face with his paws. He was pretty scared. He was a pretty scared animal when I crept up behind him and placed a heavy forepaw on his shoulder. That is really, really funny. That is really, really funny. The fact that he crept up behind the rabbit and put his hand on his shoulder, I think that's totally insane. I imagine that poor little rabbit absolutely had the fright of his life when that happened. Oh, if it were me, I mean, I get afraid really easily. My brother and my sister's favorite game when we were kids was to crawl up behind me and make me have a fright from behind, like putting a hand on my shoulder or something like that. If I was that rabbit, I would have jumped so high, like unbelievably, unbelievably high. Ah. All right, so where was I? Um, uh, I had to cuff his head once or twice to get any sense out of it at all. At last I managed to extract from him that Mole had been seen in the wildwood last night by one of them. It was the talk of the burrow, he said, and how Mole, Mr. Rat's particular friend, was in a bad fix, how he had lost his way, and they were up and out hunting, and were chivying him around and round. Then why didn't any of you do something? I asked. You mayn't be blessed with brains, but there are hundreds and hundreds of you, you big stout fellows, and as fat as butter, and your burrows running in all directions, and you could have taken him in and made him safe and comfortable, or tried to, at all events. What? Us? He merely said. Do something? Us? Rabbits? So I cuffed him again and left him. There was nothing else to be done at any rate. I had learned something, and if I had had the luck to meet any of them, I'd have learned something more, or they would. I like this otter more and more. He seems to be not the kind of guy who at all should be messed with. Weren't you at all nervous? Asked Mole, some of yesterday's terror coming back um, at the mention of the wildwood. Nervous? The otter showed a gleaming set of strong white teeth as he laughed. I'd give him nerves if any of them tried anything on me. Here, Moll, fry me some slices of ham, like the good little chap you are. I'm frightfully hungry, and I've got any amount to say to Ratty here. Haven't seen him for an age. So the good-natured Mole, having cut some slices of ham, said to the hedgehogs to fry it, and returned to his own breakfast, while the otter and the rat, their heads together, eagerly talked river shop, which is long shop, and talk that is endless, running on like the babbling river itself. A plate of fried ham had just been cleared and sent back for more, when the badger entered, yawning and rubbing his eyes, and greeted them all in his quiet, simple way, with kind inquiries for everyone. It must be getting on for luncheon time, he remarked to Otter. Better stop and have it with us. You must be hungry this cold morning. Rather, replied the otter, winking at the mole. The sight of these greedy young hedgehogs stuffing themselves with fried ham makes me feel positively famished. Famished is a beautiful word which means starved. Um, you don't hear it that you don't hear it that often, I think, anymore, but I really feel it's something that we should bring back. It's kind of like you're starved, you're so hungry, and it just sounds so much more elegant. I mean, you could say I could eat a horse, of course, but famished, um, yeah, it's just a little nicer, I guess. The hedgehogs, who were just beginning to feel hungry again after their porridge and after working so hard at their frying, looked timidly up at Badger, but were too shy to say anything. Here, you two youngsters be off home to your mother, said Badger kindly. I'll be sent I'll send some I'll send someone with you to show you the way. You won't want any dinner today, I'll be bound. He gave them sixpence apiece and a pat on the head, and they went off with much respectful swinging of caps and touching of forelocks. Presently they all sat down to luncheon together. The Mole found himself placed next to Mr. Badger, and as the other two were still deep in river gossip from which nothing could divert them, he took the opportunity to tell Mr. Badger how comfortable and homelike it all felt to him. Once well grounded, he said, you know exactly where you are. Nothing can happen to you and nothing can get at you. You're entirely your own master, and you don't have to consult anybody or mind what they say. Things go on all the same overhead, and you let them, and you don't bother about them. When you want to, up you go, and there the things are, waiting for you. The badger simply beamed at him. That's exactly what I say, he replied. There's no security or peace and tranquillity except underground. And then, if your ideas get larger and you want to expand, why, a dig and a scrape, and there you are. If you feel your house is a bit big, you stop up a hole or two. There you are again. No builders, no tradesmen, no remarks passed on you by fellows looking over every wall, and above all, no weather. Look at Rat now. A couple of feet of flood water and he's got to move into hired lodgings, uncomfortable, inconveniently situated, and horribly expensive. Take Toad. I say nothing against Toad Hole, quite the best house there is in these parts as a house. But suppose a fire breaks out. Where's Toad? Supposing tiles are blown off, or walls sink and crack, or windows get broken. Where's Toad? Supposing the rooms are draughty. I hate a draught myself. Where's Toad? No, up and out of the doors is good enough to roam about and get one's living in, but underground to come back to at last, that's my idea of a home. The Mole assented heartily, and the Badger in consequence got very friendly with him. When lunch is over, I'll take you I'll take you all round this place of mine. I can see you'll appreciate it. You understand what domestic architecture ought to be, you do. After lunch, accordingly, when the other two had settled themselves into the chimney corner and had started a heated argument on the subject of eels, the Badger lighted a lantern and bade the Mole to follow him. Crossing the hall, they passed down one of the principal tunnels, and the wavering light of the lantern gave glimpses on either side of rooms both large and small, some with cupboards, others nearly as broad and imposing as Toad's dining hall. A narrow passage at right angles led them into another corridor, and here the same thing was repeated. The Mole was staggered at the size, the extent, the ramifications of it all. At the length of the dim passages, the solid vaultings of the cramped store chambers, the masonry everywhere, the pillars, the arches, the pavements. How on earth, Badger, he said at last, did you ever find the time and strength to do all this? It's astonishing. It would be astonishing indeed, said Badger simply, if I had done it. But as a matter of fact, I did none of it, only cleaned out the passengers and chambers, as far as I had need of them. There's lots more of it, all round about. I see you don't understand, and I must explain it to you. Well, very long ago, on the spot where the wildwood waves now, before ever it had planted itself and grown up to what it now is, there was a city of people, you know. Here, where we are standing, they lived and walked and talked and slept and carried on their business. Here they stabled their horses and feasted. From here they rode out to fight and drove out to trade. They were a powerful people and rich, and great builders. They built to last, for they thought their city would last forever. But what has become of them all? Who can tell? Said the Badger. People come, they stay for a while, they flourish, they build and they go on. It is their way, but we remain. There were Badgers here, I've been told, long before that same city ever came to be. And now there are Badgers here again. We're an enduring lot, and we may move out for a time, but we wait and are patient, and back we come. And so it will ever be. Well, "And when they went at last, those people," said the Mole. "When they went," continued the Badger, "the strong winds and persistent rains took the matter in hand, patiently, ceaselessly, year after year. Perhaps we Badgers, too, in our small way, helped a little. Who knows? It was all down, 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 gradually, ruin and levelling and disappearance. Then it was all up, 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 gradually, as seeds grew to saplings, and saplings to forest trees, and bramble and fern came creeping into health. Leaf mold rose and obliterated streams in their winter freshness, brought sand and soil to clog and cover, and in course of time our home was ready for us again, and we moved in. Up above us, on the surface, the same thing happened. Animals arrived, liked the look of the place, took up their quarters, settled down, spread, flourished. They didn't bother themselves about the past. They never do. They're too busy. The place was a bit humpy and hillocky, naturally, and full of holes, but that was rather an advantage. And they don't bother about the future either. The future, when perhaps people will move in again for a time, as may very well be. The wild wood is pretty well populated now, with all the usual lot, and good, bad, and indifferent. I name no names. It takes all sorts to make the world, but I fancy you know something about them yourself by this time." "I do indeed," said the Mole, with a slight shiver. "Well, well," said the Badger, patting him on the shoulder. "It was your first experience of them, you see. They're not so bad, really, and we must all live and let live. But I'll pass the word around tomorrow, and I think you'll have no further trouble. Any friend of mine walks where he likes in this country, or I'll know the reason why." When they got back to the kitchen again, they found the Rat walking up and down very restlessly. The underground atmosphere was oppressing him and getting on his nerves, and he seemed really to be afraid that the river would run away if he wasn't there to look after it. So he had his overcoat on and his pistols thrust into his belt again. "Come along, Mole," he said anxiously, as soon as he caught sight of him. "We must get off while it's daylight. Don't want to spend another night in the wild wood again." "It'll be all right, my fine fellow," said the Otter. "I'm coming along with you, and I know every path blindfold. And there's a head that needs to be punched. You can confidently rely on me to punch it." "You really don't need to fret, Ratty," said the Badger placidly. All right, so to fret means to worry. When somebody is fretting about something, it means that they're worried. And I think in this case, they're using fret rather than worry because it seems to be kind of needless for him to be worrying this way at the moment. "My passages run further than you think, and I've bolt holes to the edge of the woods in several directions, though I don't care for everybody to know about them. When you really have to go, you shall leave by one of my shortcuts. Meantime, make yourself easy and sit down again." The Rat was nevertheless still anxious to be off and attend to his river, so the Badger, taking up his lantern again, led the way along a damp and airless tunnel that wound and dipped, partly vaulted, part hewn through solid rock, for a weary distance that seemed to be miles. At last daylight began to show itself confusedly through the tangled growth overhanging the mouth of the passage, and the Badger, bidding them a hasty good-bye, pushed them hurriedly through the opening, made everything look as natural as possible again, with creepers, brushwood, and dead leaves, and retreated. They found themselves standing at the very edge of the wild wood, rocks and brambles and tree roots behind them, confusedly heaped and tangled in front, a great space of quiet fields, hemmed by lines of black on black on the snow, and far ahead a glint of the familiar old river, while the wintry sun hung red and low on the horizon. The Otter, as knowing all the paths, took charge of the party, and they trailed out on a bee-line for a distant stile, pausing here and there a moment, and looking back, they saw the whole mass of the wild wood, dense, menacing, compact, grimly set in a vast white surroundings. Simultaneously they turned and made swiftly for home, for firelight and the familiar things it played on, or the voice sounding cheerily outside their window of the river that they knew and trusted in all its moods that never made them afraid with any amazement. As he hurried along, eagerly anticipating the moment when he would be at home again among the things he knew and liked, the mole saw clearly that he was an animal of tilled field and hedgerow, linked to the ploughed furrow, the frequented pasture, the lane of evening lingerings, the cultivated garden plot. For others, the the asperities, the stubborn endurance, or the clash of actual conflict that went with nature in the rough, he must be wise, must keep to the pleasant places in which his lines were laid and which held adventure enough in their way to last for a lifetime. All right, let me get a little sip of coffee. I think what Mole's basically saying is that he got to know himself and that it's very clear for him now that he is an animal of order. After the whole experience of being in the wildwood and being in that crazy, noisy, well, not noisy, but being in that crazy, dangerous, wild environment, he realizes that he's not that kind of animal. For him, the lanes of evening lingerings, the cultivated garden plots, those calm and beautiful places that you imagine in the English countryside, those are the things that really speak to his heart. And he doesn't have any problem with adventure, but maybe not a mad amount of adventure, maybe just enough adventure to keep him satisfied. All right, so we are continuing with chapter 5, Domum. I'm not actually sure how you pronounce that. I don't speak Latin. I mean, Dulce, I know, but Domum, I guess? All right, chapter 5. The sheep ran huddling together against the hurdles, blowing out thin nostrils and stamping with delicate forefeet, their heads thrown back and a light steam rising from the crowded sheep pen into the frosty air, as the two animals hastened by in high spirits with much chatter and laughter. They were returning across the country after a long day's outing with Otter, hunting and exploring on the wide uplands where certain streams tributary to their own river had their first small beginnings, and the shades of the short winter days were closing in on them, and they had still some distance to go. Plodding at random across the plough, they had heard the sheep and made for them, and now leading from the sheep pen, they found a beaten track that made walking a lighter business, and responded, moreover, to that small inquiring something which all animals carry inside them, saying unmistakably, "Yes, quite right. This leads home." "It looks as if we're coming to a village," said the mole somewhat dubiously, slacking his pace as the track, that had in time become a path and then had developed into a lane, now handed them over to the charge of a well-metalled road. The animals did not hold with villages, and their own highways, thickly frequented as they were, took an independent course, regardless of church, post office, or public house. "Oh, never mind," said the rat. "At this season of the year they're all safe indoors by this time, sitting around the fire, men, women, and children, dogs and cats and all. We shall slip through all right, without any bother or unpleasantness, and we can have a look at them through the windows if you like, and see what they're doing." The rapid nightfall of mid-December had quite beset the little village as they approached it on soft feet over a first thin fall of powdery snow. Little was visible but squares of dusky orange-red on either side of the street, where the firelight or lamplight of each cottage overflowed through the casements into the dark world without. Most of the low latticed windows were innocent of blinds, and to the lookers in from outside, the inmates, gathered around the tea table, absorbed in handiwork or talking with laughter and gesture, had each that happy grace which is the last thing the skilled actor shall capture, moving at the natural grace which goes with perfect unconsciousness of observation. Moving at will from one theatre to another, Moving at will from one theatre to another, the two spectators, so far from home themselves, had something of wistfulness in their eyes as they watched a cat being stroked, a sleepy child picked up and huddled off to bed, or a tired man stretch and knock out his pipe at the end of a smouldering log. But it was from one little window, with its blind drawn down, a mere blank transparency of the night, that the sense of home and the little curtained world most pulsated. Close against the white blind hung a bird cage, clearly silhouetted, every wire, perch, and upturnance distinct and recognizable, even to even to yesterday's dull-edged lump of sugar. On the middle perch, the fluffy occupant, head tucked well into feathers, seemed so near to them as to be easily stroked had they tried, even the delicate tips of its plumped out plumage penciled plainly on the illuminated screen. As they looked, the sleepy little fellow stirred uneasily, woke, shook himself, and raised his head. They could see the gape of his tiny beak as he yawned in a bored sort of way, looked around, and then settled his head into his back again, while the ruffled feathers gradually subsided into perfect stillness. Then a gust of bitter wind took them in the back of the neck. A small sting of frozen sleet on the skin woke them as from a dream, and they knew their toes to be cold and their legs tired, and their own home distant and weary walk away. Once beyond the village, where the cottages ceased abruptly, and on either side of the road, they could smell through the darkness the friendly fields again, and they braced themselves for the last long stretch, the home stretch, the stretch that we know is bound to end sometime in the rattle of the door latch, the sudden firelight, and the sight of familiar things greeting us as long absent travellers from far oversea. They plodded along steadily and silently, each of them thinking his own thoughts. The mole ran a good deal on supper, as it was pitch dark and it was all a strange country for him as far as he knew, and he was following obediently in the wake of Rat, leaving the guidance entirely to him. As for Rat, he was walking a little way ahead, as his habit was, his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the strange grey road in front of him, so he did not notice poor Mole when suddenly the summons reached him and took him like an electric shock. We others, who have long lost more subtle of the physical senses, have not even proper terms to express an animal's intercommunication with his surroundings, living or otherwise, and have only the word smell, for instance, to include the whole range of delicate trills that which murmur in the nose of the animal night and day, summoning, warning, enticing, repelling. It was one of these mysterious calls from out of the void that suddenly reached Mole in the darkness, making him tingle through and through with its very familiar appeal, even while yet he could not clearly remember what it was. He stopped dead in his tracks, his nose searching hither and thither in its effort to recapture the fine filament, the telegraphic current that had so strongly moved him. A moment, and he had caught it again, and with it, this time, came a recollection in the fullest flood. All right, I just want to stop here again very quickly and talk about that expression hither and thither. He stopped dead in his tracks, his nose searching hither and thither in his efforts to recapture the fine filament. Hither and thither is basically a more classic way of saying here and there. And definitely, I think there could be situations today where you could still use that. In this case, Mole was kind of searching all over the place and quite urgently. And you could definitely use hither and thither in the same way today. For example, I was going hither and thither all over the house trying to find my keys and I just couldn't find them. Or I was running hither and thither through the mall, but I couldn't find the thing I was looking for, or something like that. Home. That was what they meant, those caressing appeals, those soft touches wafted through the air, those invisible little hands pulling and tugging all one way. Why, it must be quite close by, and at that moment his old home, that he had hurriedly forsaken and never sought again, that day when he first found the river, and now it was sending out its scouts and its messages to capture him and bring him in. Since his escape on that bright morning, he had hardly given it a thought, so absorbed had he been in his new life, in all its pleasures, its surprises, its fresh and captivating experiences. Now, with a rush of old memories, how clearly it stood up before him in the darkness, shabby indeed, and small and poorly furnished, and yet his, the home he had made for himself, the home he had been so happy to get back to after his day's work, and the home he had been happy with him too, evidently, and was missing him and wanting him back, and was telling him so through his nose, sorrowfully, reproachfully, but with no bitterness or anger, only plaintive only with plaintive reminder that it was there and wanted him. Wow, isn't that amazing? The poor mole on that first day of spring, 2 seasons ago it is now by my count, just ran out of his house because he was excited to get away from his spring cleaning, and then met up with the rat and completely forgot about the rest of his life. And here he is on a completely unrelated random evening almost 2 years later, and suddenly through his like super senses, his home is calling out to him again. And I love in this last little sentence how he describes it as sorrowfully and reproachfully. When you reproach someone, you kind of judge them and maybe kind of scold them slightly. But in the very next line, it says, but with no bitterness or anger. So it's kind of actually more like disappointment. His home was disappointed that he disappeared and didn't come back. But without being anger or bitter, it's just urgently trying to remind him to come home and to find that again. And I think that's so beautiful. When I was younger, I traveled far away from home with very little, let's say, worldliness. And it's so easy to go into a new environment. I went from South Africa, from a very small town to the UK, and you just get thrown into this whole new world and you get kind of dazzled by, all of the lights and the distractions and things like that. But there's something rather special about coming home. It's something that you can't quantify, but when you're near it, when you feel it, you know that it's there. And that's a really beautiful and amazing thing. There's nothing that makes one more content than one's own home, I reckon. The call was clear. The summons was plain. He must obey it instantly and go. Ratty, he called, full of joyful excitement. Hold on, come back. I want you, quick. Oh, come along, Mole, do, replied Rat cheerfully, still plodding along. Please, stop, Ratty, pleaded the poor Mole in anguish of heart. You don't understand. It's my home, my old home. I've just come across the smell of it, and it's close by here, really quite close. And I must go to it. I must, I must. Oh, come back, Ratty, please, come back. The rat was by this time very far ahead, too far to hear clearly what the mole was calling, too far to catch the sharp note of painful appeal in his voice, and was much taken up with the weather, for he too could smell something suspiciously like approaching snow. Mole, we mustn't stop now, really. We'll come for it tomorrow, whatever it is you found. But I daren't stop now. It's late and the snow's coming on again. I'm not sure of the way, and I want your nose, Mole, so come on quick, there's a good fellow. And the rat pressed forward on his way without waiting for an answer. Poor Mole stood alone in the road, his heart torn asunder, and a big sob gathering somewhere low down inside of him, to leap up to the surface presently, he knew, in passionate escape. Oh, his heart torn asunder. That basically just means his heart was broken into a million little pieces, the poor little mole, and the tears were just sitting right here in his throat, right here in his throat, waiting to escape passionately at any moment. But even under such a test as his loyalty to his friend stood firm. Never for a moment did he dream of abandoning him. Meanwhile, the wafts from his old home pleaded, whispered, conjured, and finally claimed him imperiously. Here's that word imperiously again. He dared not tarry longer within their magic circle. With a wrench that tore at his heartstrings, he set his face down the road and followed submissively in the track of Rat, while faint, thin little smells, still dogging his retreating nose, reproached him for his new friendship and his callous forgetfulness. With an effort, he caught up to the unsuspecting Rat, who began chattering cheerfully about what they would do when they got back, and how jolly a fire of logs in the parlour would be, and what a supper he meant to eat, never noticing his companion's silence and distressed state of mind. At last, however, when they had gone some considerable way further, and were passing some tree stumps at the edge of a copse that bordered the road, he stopped and said kindly, "Look here, Mole, old chap, you seem dead tired. No talk left in you, and your feet dragging like lead. We'll sit down here for a minute and rest. The snow has held off so far, the best part of our journey's over." The mole subsided forlornly on a tree stump and tried to control himself, for he felt it surely coming. In this case, he's feeling that sob, that absolute heart-wrenching sob gathering up in him, and he knows he's going to cry at every second. He subsided forlornly. When you're forlorn, you're basically hopeless, like you've given up. There's just no hope for the situation, and there's nothing that you can do. So, if the mole subsided forlornly on a tree stump, he'd pretty much given up on the situation, but he was still really distraught. The sob he had fought with so long refused to be beaten. Up and up it forced its way into the air, and then another and others thick and fast, till poor Mole at last gave up the struggle, and cried freely, helplessly, and openly, now that he knew it was all over, and he had lost what he could hardly be said to have found. The Rat, astonished and dismayed at the violent paroxysms of grief, did not dare to speak for a while. At last he said, very quietly and sympathetically, "What is it, old fellow? Whatever can be the matter? Tell us your trouble, and let me see what I can do." Poor Mole found it difficult to get any words out between the upheavals of his chest that followed one upon another so quickly, and held back speech and choked it as it came. I know it's a shabby, dingy little place," he sobbed forth at last brokenly, "not like your cosy quarters, or Toad's beautiful hall, or Badger's great house, but it was my own little home, and I was fond of it. I went away and forgot all about it, and then I smelt it, suddenly, on the road, when I called and you wouldn't listen, Rat, and everything came back to me with a rush, and I wanted it. Oh dear, oh dear! And when you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, and I had to leave it, though I was smelling it all the time, I thought my heart would break. We might have just gone and had one look at it, Ratty. Only one look. It was close by, but you wouldn't turn back, Ratty. You wouldn't turn back. Oh dear, oh dear. Recollection brought fresh waves of sorrow, and sobs again took charge of him, preventing further speech. The rat stared straight in front of him, saying nothing, only patting Mole gently on the shoulder. After a time he muttered gloomily, I see it all now. What a pig I have been. A pig, that's me. Just a pig. A plain pig. He waited till Mole's sobs became gradually less stormy and more rhythmical. He waited till at last sniffs were frequent and sobs only intermittent. Then he rose from his seat, and remarking carelessly, Well now, we'd really better be getting on, old chap, and set off up the road again, over the toilsome way they had come. Wherever are you going, Ratty? Cried the tearful Mole, looking up in alarm. We're going to find that home of yours, old fellow, he replied pleasantly, so you'd better come along, for it would take some finding, and we shall want your nose. Oh, come back, Ratty, do, cried the Mole, getting up and hurrying after him. It's no good, I tell you, it's too late and too dark, and the place is too far off, and the snow's coming, and I never meant to let you know I was feeling that way about it. It was all an accident and a mistake, and think of the river bank and your supper. Hang Riverbank, and supper too, said Rat heartily. I tell you, I'm going to find this place now if I stay out all night. So cheer up, old chap, and take my arm, and we'll very soon be back there again. Man, isn't that just beautiful? I mean, really, isn't that just beautiful? That is such an incredible interaction of friendship. I almost don't know what to say about it. I think we've all had situations where we've held back on saying things, doing things, trying to be brave, trying to stay strong, um, for the sake of other people, maybe feeling that they were a bit callous or careless, but still doing it anyway. And Rat just immediately realizes what an idiot he's been and immediately starts to take action to make up for it. And that just shows you what a beautiful, true, and deep friendship they've developed between the two of them. It's really amazing. Still snuffling, pleading, and reluctant, Mole suffered himself to be dragged back along the road by his imperious companion, who by a flow of cheerful talk and an anecdote endeavoured to beguile his spirits back and make the weary way seem shorter. When at last it seemed to the rat that they must be nearing that part of the road where Mole had been held up, he said, Now no more talking. Business. Use your nose and give your mind to it. They moved on in silence for some little way, when suddenly the rat was conscious through his arm that was linked in Mole's of a faint sort of electric trill that was passing down the animal's body. Instantly he disengaged himself, fell back a pace, and waited, all attention. The signals were coming through. Mole stood a moment, rigid, while his uplifted nose, quivering slightly, felt the air. Then a short, quick run forward, a fault, a check, a try back, and then a slow, steady, confident advance. The rat, much excited, kept close to the heels, as the mole, with something of an air of a sleep-walker, crossed a dry ditch, scrambled through a hedge, and nosed his way over a field, open and trackless and bare in the faint starlight. Suddenly, without giving warning, he dived, but the rat was on alert, and promptly followed him down the tunnel to which his unerring nose had faithfully led him. It was close and airless, and the earthy smell was strong, and it seemed a long time to Rat ere the passage ended, and he could stand erect and stretch and shake himself. The mole struck a match, and by its light the rat saw that they were standing in an open space, neatly swept and sanded underfoot, and directly facing them was Mole's little front door, with Mole End painted in Gothic lettering over the bell pull at the side. Mole reached down a lantern from the nail on the wall and lit it, and the rat, looking around him, saw that they were in a sort of forecourt. A garden seat stood on one side of the door, and on the other a roller, for the mole, who was a tidy animal when at home, could not stand having his ground kicked up by the other animals into little runs that ended in earth heaps. On the walls hung wire baskets with ferns in them, alternating with brackets carrying plaster statuary, Garibaldi and the infant Samuel and Queen Victoria and other heroes of modern Italy. Down on the one side of the forecourt ran a skittle alley with benches along it and little wooden tables marked with rings that hinted at beer mugs. In the middle was a small round pond containing goldfish and surrounded by a cockleshell border. Out of the center of the pond rose a fanciful erection closed in more cockleshells and topped by a large silvered glass ball that reflected everything all wrong and had very pleasing effect. Mole's face beamed at the sight of all these objects so dear to him, and he hurried Rat through the door, lit a lamp in the hall, and took one glance around his old home. He saw the dust lying thick on everything, saw the cheerless, deserted look of the long neglected house, and its narrow, meagre dimensions, its worn and shabby contents, and collapsed again on an old chair, his nose to his paws. "Oh, Ratty!" he cried dismally, "whatever did I go? Whatever did I do it? Why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place on a night like this, when you might have been at Riverbank by this time, toasting your toes before a blazing fire with all your own nice things about you?" Well, this is quite cool. The word meager, its narrow, meager dimensions. When something is meager, it's kind of, how should I say, impoverished, quite small, not enough. Um, Poor in a way, I guess. So what they're saying by that is that it's quite a small place and that a lot of the things in there are quite worn out and shabby. And I think this is making the mole feel quite self-conscious about bringing his friend, who maybe is a little bit cooler than him, to his house. The rat paid no heed to his doleful self-reproaches. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, and lighting lamps and candles and sticking them up everywhere. "What a capital little house this is!" he called out cheerily. All right, when you say something is capital, it means that it's fantastic, it's great, top notch. So compact, so well planned, everything here and everything in its place. We'll make a jolly night of it. The first thing we want is a good fire. I'll see to that. I always know where to find things. So this is the parlor. Splendid. Your own idea, those little sleeping bunks in the wall. Capital. Now I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get a duster, Mole, and you'll find one in the drawer of the kitchen table, and try and smarten things up a bit. Bustle about, old chap." Encouraged by his inspiriting companion, the mole roused himself and dusted and polished with energy and heartiness, while the rat, running to and fro with arms full of fuel, soon had a cheerful blaze roaring up the chimney. He hailed Mole he hailed the mole to come and warm himself, but Mole promptly had another fit of the blues, dropping down on the couch in dark despair and burying his face in the duster. "Rat," he moaned, "how about your supper? You poor, cold, hungry, weary animal. I've nothing to give you, not a crumb." "What a fellow you are for giving in," said the rat reproachfully. "Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser, quite distinctly, and everybody knows that means there are sardines about somewhere in the neighborhood. Rouse yourself, pull yourself together, and come with me and forage." They went and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not so very depressing after all, though of course it might have been better. A tin of sardines, a box of Captain's biscuits nearly full, and a German sausage encased in a silver wrapper. "There's a banquet for you," observed the rat, as he arranged the table. "I know some animals who would give their ears to be sitting down to a supper with us tonight." "No bread," Grold moaned dolorously. "No butter, no pâté foie gras, no champagne," continued the rat, grinning. "And that reminds me. What's that little door at the end of the passage? Your cellar, of course. Every luxury in this house. Just you wait a minute. He made for the cellar door, and presently reappeared somewhat dusty, with a bottle of beer in each paw and another under each arm. Self-indulgent beggar you seem to be, Mole, he observed. Deny yourself nothing. This is really the jolliest little place I ever was in. Now, wherever did you pick up those prints? Make the place look so homelike, they do. No wonder you're so fond of it, Mole. Tell us all about it, and how you came to make it what it is. Then, while the Rat busied himself fetching plates and knives and forks, and mustard, which he mixed in an egg cup, the Mole, his bosom still heaving with the stress of his recent emotion, related, somewhat shyly at first, but with more freedom as he warmed to the subject, how this was planned, and how that was thought out, and how this was got through a windfall from an aunt, and that was a wonderful find and a bargain, and this other thing was bought out of laborious savings, and a certain amount of going without. His spirits finally quite restored, he must needs go and caress his possessions, and take a lamp and show off their points to his visitor, and expatiate on them, quite forgetful of the supper they both so much needed. Rat, who was desperately hungry, but strove to conceal it, nodding seriously, examining with a puckered brow, and saying wonderful and most remarkable at intervals, when the chance for an observation was given him. At last the Rat succeeded in decoying him to a table, and just got seriously to work with the sardine opener, when sounds were heard from the forecourt without, sounds like scuffling of small feet in the gravel, and a confused murmur of tiny voices, while broken sentences reached them. "Now all in a line. Hold the lantern up a bit. Tommy, clear your throat first. No coughing after I say 1, 2, 3. Where's young Bull? Here, come on, do. We're all waiting." "What's up?" inquired the Rat, pausing in his labour. "I think it must be the field mice," replied Mole, with a touch of pride in his manner. "They go around carol singing regularly at this time of year. They're quite an institution in these parts, and they never pass me over. They come to Mole End last of all, and I used to give them hot drinks, and supper too sometimes when I could afford it. It'll be like old times to hear them again." "Well, let's have a look at them," cried the Rat, jumping up and running to the door. It was a pretty sight, and a seasonable one, that met their eyes when they flung the door open. In the forecourt, lit by dim rays of horn lantern, some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle, red worsted comforters round their throats, their forepaws thrust deep into their pockets, their feet jingling for warmth. Worsted is a weight of wool, so they were wearing red comforters made of wool. With bright beady eyes they glanced shyly at each other, sniggered a little, sniffing and applying coat sleeves a good deal. As the door opened, one of the elder ones that carried the lantern was just saying, "Now then, 1, 2, 3," and forthwith their shrill little voices uprose on the air, singing one of the old-time carols that their forefathers composed in fields that were fallow and held by frost, or when snowbound in chimney corners, and handed down to be sung in the miry street to lamplit windows at Yule time. Carol. Villagers all, this frosty tide, let your doors swing open wide. Though wind may follow and snow beside, yet draw us in, by your fire bide. Joy shall be yours in the morning. Here we stand in the cold and sleet, blowing fingers and stamping feet. Come from far away, you to greet, you by the fire, we in the street, bidding you joy in the morning. For ere one half of the night was gone, sudden a star has led us on, raising bliss and benison, bliss to-morrow and more anon, joy for every morning. Goodman Joseph toiled through the snow, saw the star over a stable low. Mary she might not further go, welcome thatch and litter below, joy was hers in the morning. And then they heard the angels tell, who were the first to cry Noel. Animals all, as it befell, in the stable where they did dwell, joy shall be theirs in the morning. The voices ceased, the singers, bashful but smiling, exchanged sidelong glances, and silence succeeded, but for only a moment. Then, from up above and far away, down the tunnel they had so lately travelled, was borne to their ears a faint musical hum, the sound of distant bells ringing a joyful, clangorous peal. "Well, very well sung, boys!" cried the Rat heartily. "And now come along in, all of you, and warm yourselves by the fire, and have something hot." "Yes, come along, Field Mice!" cried Mole eagerly. "This is quite like old times. Shut the door after you. Pull up that settle to the fire. Now just wait a minute while we—" "Oh, Ratty!" he cried in despair, plumping down on a seat, with tears impending. "Whatever are we going to do? We've nothing to give them." "You leave that all to me," said the masterful Rat. "Here, you with the lantern, come over this way. I want to talk to you. Now tell me, are there any shops in are there any shops open at this hour of the night?" "Why, certainly, sir. At this time of year our shops keep open to all sorts of hours." "Then look here," said the Rat. "You go off at once, you and your lantern, and you get me—" Here much muttering conversation ensued, and the Mole only heard bits of it, such as "fresh, mind! No, a pound of that will do. See you get Buggins, for I won't have any other. No, only the best. If you can't get it there, try somewhere else. Yes, of course, homemade, no tin stuff. Well then, do the best you can." Finally there was a chink of coin passing from paw to paw. The field mouse was provided with an ample basket for his purchases, and off he hurried, he and his lantern. The rest of the field mice, perched in a row on the settle, their small legs swinging, gave themselves up to the enjoyment of the fire, and toasted their chilblains till they tingled, while the mole, failing to draw them into easy conversation, plunged into family history, and made each of them recite the names of his numerous brothers, who were too young, it appeared, to be allowed to go out a-carolling this year, but looked forward to very shortly winning the parental consent. The Rat, meanwhile, was busy examining the label on one of the beer bottles. "I perceive this to be old Burton," he remarked approvingly. "Sensible Mole. The very thing. Now we shall be able to mull some ale. Get the things ready, Mole, while I draw the corks." It did not take long to prepare the brew and thrust the tin eater well into the red heart of the fire, and soon every field mouse was sipping and coughing and choking, for a little mulled ale goes a long way, and wiping his eyes and laughing and forgetting he had ever been cold in all his life. "They act plays too, these fellows," the Mole explained to Rat. "Make them up all by themselves and act them out afterwards, and very well they do it too. They gave us a capital one last year about a field mouse who was captured at sea by a Barbary corsair and made to row in a galley, and when he escaped and he got home again, his lady love had gone into a convent. Here you were in it, I remember. Get up and recite a bit." The field mouse addressed got up on his legs, giggled shyly, looked around the room, and remained absolutely tongue-tied. His comrades cheered him on. Mole coaxed and encouraged him, and the Rat went so far as to take him by the shoulders and shake him, but nothing could overcome his stage fright. They were all busily engaged on him like watermen replying to the Royal Humane Society's regulations to a case of long submersion, when the latch clicked, the door opened, and the field mouse with the lantern reappeared, staggering under the weight of his basket. There was no more talk of play acting once the very real and solid contents of the basket had been tumbled out on the table. Under the generalship of Rat, everybody was set to do something or to fetch something. In a very few minutes supper was ready, and Mole, as he took the head of the table in a sort of dream, saw a lately barren board set thick with savoury comforts, saw his little friends' faces brighten and beam as they fell to without delay, and then let himself loose, for he was famished indeed, and the provender so magically provided, thinking what a happy home-coming this had turned out after all. As they ate, they talked of old times, and the field mice gave him the local gossip up to date, and answered as well as they could the 100 questions he had asked them. The Rat said little or nothing, only taking care that each guest had what they wanted and plenty of it, and that Mole had no trouble or anxiety about anything. They clattered off at last, very grateful and showering wishes of the season, with their jacket pockets stuffed with remembrances for the small brothers and sisters at home. When the door had closed on the last of them and the chink of lanterns had died away, Mole and Rat kicked the fire up, drew their chairs in, brewed themselves a last nightcap of mulled wine, and discussed the events of the long day. At last, the Rat, with a tremendous yawn, said, "Mole, old chap, I'm ready to drop. Sleepy is simply not the word. That your own bunk over that side? Very well, then. I'll take this. What a ripping little house this is. Everything's so handy." He clambered into his bunk and rolled himself well up in his blanket, and slumber gathered him forthwith as a swathe of barley is folded into the arms of a reaping machine. The really Mole was glad to turn in without delay, and soon had his head on his pillow in a great joy and contentment. But ere he closed his eyes, he let them wander around his old room, mellow in the glow of the firelight that played or rested on familiar and friendly things which had long been unconsciously a part of him, and now smilingly received them back without rancor. He was now in just the frame of mind that the tactful Rat had quietly worked to bring about in him. He saw clearly how plain and simple, how narrow even it all was, but clearly, too, how much it all meant to him, the special value of such anchorage in one's existence. He did not at all want to abandon the new life and its splendid spaces, to turn his back on sun and air and all they offered him, and creep home and stay there. The upper world was all too strong, it called to him still, even down there, and he knew he must return to the larger stage. But it was good to think he had this to come back to, this place which was all his own, these things which were so glad to see him again, and could always be counted upon for the same simple welcome. Well, everyone, I think I'm going to leave it here for this evening, just before we start chapter 6, Mr. Toad, because I know that's going to be exciting and fun. I seem to be having some audio problems every now and then. I'm not sure if any of you can hear that, but I am going to take that into consideration and cut things here and try and avoid that. Thank you so much for your time and for popping in to today's stream. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to see you in the chat when you do join. As always, if you haven't seen the first part, you can catch that on the first stream, which you'll find in the Wind in the Willows playlist. Thank you so much for a wonderful evening and take good care of yourselves until next time.